Babaji. He flogged here and there, always chanting. When you talked with him, he was always laughing. He was always, a very jolly friend of mine. He would say something, and then when you replied, he would be chanting. So his holy name was always on his tongue. And I believe that when Prabhupada took sannyas, the very next morning, he took Akinchana Krishnadas Babaji with him preaching. So, they were close. So you can say that Akinchana Krishnadas, if anybody knew about chanting, he did. And then the person that he was talking to was Bon Maharaj. Yeah. So Bon Maharaj, of course, he made the effort in the 1930s. He came back empty-handed. So they had this conversation, and Babaji asked Bon Maharaj, what was the difference between you and Swami Maharaj? So he said, now he was a learned scholar, you're a learned scholar. He was fluent in English, you're also fluent in English. He went to the West, and you went to the West. He was successful, and you were not. Why? And then apparently he answered his own question by saying, because he had great faith in the holy names. So that's his analysis of Prabhupada's success, that he was completely, utterly surrendered to the holy name. He had so much faith, and therefore the holy name was able to appear in all these other countries through his agency. Of course, that doesn't say much about Bon Maharaj's chanting and faith in the holy names. But, and I have to say that I was on a morning walk in 1974 in Melbourne. This was before I became Prabhupada's servant. And Prabhupada was stressing about preaching and book distribution. And there was at one point, something struck me that, Prabhupada had the same facilities as his godbrothers, or at least his godbrothers had the same facility that Prabhupada had. It was the same philosophy. They'd also received the instruction, and they'd gone to the West, but they weren't successful, and I was trying to figure out why. So I asked Prabhupada that, well, it seems like your godbrothers had all the same opportunity or facility, and they were sincere. And as soon as I said that, Prabhupada stopped. He said, they were never sincere. So I guess it depends on how you define sincerity, but by Prabhupada's standards, they weren't, and that's why they weren't successful. So Prabhupada, again, was very, very sincere. And there was at least one other godbrother that appreciated. I mean, there were several godbrothers that appreciated what Prabhupada was doing, but we shouldn't think that everybody, in the 1970s when the preaching was going on and ISKCON was expanding, that everybody appreciated, because they didn't. There were many godbrothers that, had, material explanations, if you like, as to why Prabhupada managed to do something. Oh, well, he got some foolish American hippies, they have more money than sense, so he's simply doing everything on the basis of some business. I like that. We've heard so many things. But at least one godbrother anyway, B.R. Sridhar Swami, he was Prabhupada's close friend. They had preached together in the 40s in Calcutta. They were staying in the same building, Sitakanta Banerjee Lane. And they used to go out, and there was, again, a motivation for Prabhupada in preaching with Sridhar Maharaj or going out with him. He had moved back from Allahabad to Calcutta. He'd rented this place at Sitakanta Banerjee Lane. There were some rooms there that were available, and he persuaded Sridhar Maharaj to rent those rooms so that they could go out and, preach together. And the motivation for Prabhupada, apart from them being close friends, was that in 1935, when they were in Radhakund, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati again was preaching, and he was telling Abhay Charana Ravindo, you go out, you're enthusiastic, you preach. And then he pointed to Sridhar Maharaj, and he told Prabhupada that, and you drag him out and make him preach. He is very qualified, but he does not like to preach. So Prabhupada had a direct instruction from his spiritual master to drag his godbrother out and make him preach. There's a big history there, of course, but Prabhupada attempted that all the way till, his own disappearance. in 77 we had gone to Navadvip, to Sridhar Maharaj's mutt. And there was a conversation there when Prabhupada was describing all the things that were going on in ISKCON. You know, amazing stuff. We just had the Rath Yatra in New York in the summer, you know, huge climax, if you like, to 10 years of preaching in America. Millions of books are going out all over the place. Mayapur's coming up. And Prabhupada at one point suggested to Sridhar Maharaj that why don't you come and stay with me in Mayapur and you can help me manage everything. This is more than one man can do. So I think he even suggested you could be the president. So a lot has been made of that over the years, misinterpretation that Prabhupada was recognizing Sridhar Maharaj was superior to him, blah, blah, blah. We've heard it all before. But that's not actually what was going on. What was really going on, and there is an oblique reference in the conversation to that time in 1935 when the Guru Maharaj had told Prabhupada, drag him out and make him preach. And Prabhupada made a reference to that in 77 when they had their conversation. Anyway, Sridhar Maharaj was very appreciative of what Prabhupada had done, and that was expressed a couple of times. When I was with Prabhupada in 1976 in Mayapur, Sridhar Maharaj in 76, he came over to our place, and he stayed for most of the afternoon. He and Prabhupada took prasadam together on the veranda. Prabhupada had him stay in the room right next to his own, and after a light rest, then they talked for the rest of the afternoon. So normally, at that point, I was in a habit of always being in Prabhupada's room whenever any visitors came. It didn't matter whether they were GBCs, sannyasis, or outsiders, or whatever. My instruction from Prabhupada was, he had told me the first day that he made me like the regular servant, that now your only business is to be with me 24 hours. So I took that literally as I could. And whenever anything was going on in Prabhupada's room, I was in there. However, when Sridhar Maharaj came, I stayed out because they were so intimately connected and obviously on a totally different level than I was. And I felt that if I was sitting in the room, you know, kind of listening in, if you like, it was going to be a bit of an imposition and really a bit impertinent on my side. So I stayed out. But I was really keen to know, you know, what they talked about. So as soon as Sridhar Maharaj left, I went into Prabhupada's room, and Prabhupada was smiling, and he started telling me a bit about what they'd said. So he said that they'd exchanged some reports on each other's preaching. And then Sridhar Maharaj had told him something that he also said the year before. He said that actually, he said, you are the real Acharya. He said, this instruction, Prativachay Chajato Nagara, he said, we had thought that this was just some kind of poetic composition only. But we couldn't imagine literally every town and village in the world, maybe in India. Yeah, and of course, they'd had the experience from the 30s that the attempt had been made in England and it wasn't successful. Maybe that convinced a lot of them that it was not possible, literally, to take the holy name to every town and village in the world. But he said, so he told Prabhupada that we had thought it was just some, you know, maybe some poetic composition, but we had not taken it literally. But he said, now we can understand the true meaning of that verse because of what you've done, and you've actually fulfilled it. So that was a nice recognition. There is a letter that Prabhupada wrote the year before, in July of 75. And it's interesting that he wrote this letter to Bon Maharaj. I mean, Bon Maharaj was a bit, anyway, he wasn't very sincere in some of his actions. In 1975, he had been touring some universities. He was kind of advertising himself as a Gaudiya scholar. And he liked to, you know, associate on that level, not with ordinary people, but people that he thought were intelligent enough, you know, to appreciate him. So he had apparently made some comments to some professor in America, because at this point, the rest of the Chaitanya Charitamrita had just been published, so the all 17 volumes were out. The library party devotees were in ecstasy. They were going around and selling full sets of Prabhupada's books. So to the universities, and they were meeting many professors, and they found out that Bon Maharaj had been advising some of the professors that he knew not to buy Prabhupada's books. So, you know, there was a bit of agitation there. So I don't know whether this letter is directly in reference to Bon Maharaj's negative, you know, mood towards Prabhupada's preaching or whatever. But he does mention in that letter, he says, Sripad Sridhar Maharaj also appreciated my service. He said that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's prediction, Prativachay Chajato Nagaradi Gram, Savatra Prachar Hobe Nam, would remain a dream only. But he congratulated me that I have done it practically. So there's a bit of appreciation there, at least from Sridhar Maharaj, and that's quite significant that he that he had told Prabhupada that you were the real Acharya, because there was a whole, you know, kerfuffle after Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati left the planet. Different camps broke out instead of cooperating together and forming a GBC as they've been told to do. Instead, Sridhar Maharaj was responsible for promoting another godbrother, Ananta Vasudeva, as being the next Acharya. So there was a big conflict between 2 or 3 different camps, mainly Tirtha Maharaj's camp and the Bagbazar camp, which was the, you know, supporting Ananta Vasudeva. And then after some time, well, actually, because Sridhar Maharaj was giving his backing to Ananta Vasudeva, many of the other sannyasis followed suit, because he was, you know, one of the leading figures in the Gaudiya Math. But then after some time, Ananta Vasudeva was exposed, he was cheating, he was falling down, and so then they had to withdraw their support. And then after that, then each individual sannyasi declared themselves to be the acharyas of their own little mutts, and the whole thing fragmented, and it's never been put back together again. I'm just giving a brief overview here, but the point is that Sridhar Maharaj, you know, is one of these who was pushing this idea that there should be a single acharya of the whole movement to replace Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, and it was a failure. So it's quite significant that in, you know, 1976 or 75, some 30 years later, just about 30 years later, that he finally tells Prabhupada that actually you're the real acharya, because you've done it, you've gone out and you've actually fulfilled this prediction. So it's a nice recognition from him. So let's look at Prabhupada leaving then on the boat. He took with him, because he picked up 200 sets of his books in Cochin, I think in South India. They went down around the tip of India, up to, then to Cochin, and then set out over the Indian Ocean. So he had a couple of 100 sets of his first canto to take with him, and that was it. He wasn't allowed to take any money, so all he had was about $40. $7. He had 40 rupees, which he swapped with the ship's captain so that he would have at least some American currency, and that was it. That's what he had. So it's interesting that when Prabhupada left, and he took those 200 sets of books with him, but the Bhagavatam was already in America. It had already arrived there, because after he published the 3rd part of it, he completed the first canto, he had engaged a book distributor in Delhi to sell them for him in all the bookstores. So this company, they had sold 17 or 18 sets of Prabhupada's Bhagavatam to the American embassy. And they had immediately shipped them out to America. So when Prabhupada arrived, the books were already there. It's very significant. And he had gone down, of course, to Butler, Pennsylvania for a month. And then on the way, he decided after a month to go up to New York and try his luck there. He had been invited by some professor that he had met to come and give a talk at the university in Pennsylvania. So on the way up, Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, on the way up, Prabhupada stopped off there. He gave the talk, and then he went to the library to try and sell them a set of his books. So when he showed them, they said, "Oh, we already have those." They were already there. They've been distributed by the American Embassy. So it's very significant. This is Prabhupada's mission, the Srimad Bhagavatam. Now, he took with him this leaflet. It was a one-page leaflet, simple printed leaflet. When we were in New Mayapur in France in August of '76, somebody had found one of these original leaflets and put it on Prabhupada's desk. I think maybe it might have been Yogeshwar actually. So August the 4th, Prabhupada came out from his bedroom. He had his hour's rest after lunch. And as he sat down, I pointed out to him, this leaflet's here. This is the one that you originally took with you to America to begin your preaching. So Prabhupada, oh, okay, very nice. He was interested. And so he said, so read it. So he had me read it out to him. So Prabhupada's picture was on the front with the title reading, Srimad Bhagavatam, India's Message of Peace and Goodwill. 60 volumes of elaborate English version by Tridandi Goswami, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, carried by the Scindia Steam Navigation Company, Bombay, all over the world for scientific knowledge of God. So that's that was the opening headline. So it's very interesting. If you break that down, it really says a lot about Prabhupada as a personality and what he was about. So the first thing he says, Srimad Bhagavatam. That's his mission. India's message of peace and goodwill. So, we all heard so many things about peace and goodwill, and, there's just more and more wars every year. There's no peace and goodwill at all. So why was Prabhupada using, it sounded a bit like, a mundane explanation of what the Bhagavatam's about, Could be the story of Krishna's transcendental leelas and, the transcendental literature. But he says India's message of peace and goodwill. So Prabhupada himself was not impressed, with efforts at so-called peace conferences and things like this. In 1974, they were in Berkeley, and there's a few gurus had come to see him. In those days there was like a guru circuit, and there was Swami Chidananda from the Divine Life Society. There was Yogi Bhajan, the Sikh. He'd been making American followers. You used to see them walking around with big turbans on their heads, Americans. And a couple of others were there. So they were planning a world peace conference, and they wanted Prabhupada to come and be one of the speakers. And the idea was, we're all Hindus, we're from India, this is where the real land of peace and, spiritual knowledge is, so we should show people how, everybody can be peaceful, give some talks. Prabhupada refused. He said, there'll never be peace. He said, we're all wasting your time. So they tried to persuade him, but he wouldn't budge. He had nothing to do with it, so they went off disappointed. And I had a similar experience in 1976. We just arrived in Mayapur in mid-January, and things were very quiet at that time. Mayapur was still not as much on the map as it is, of course, now. But it was quiet during the week. Hardly any visitors at all, so it gave Prabhupada a chance to rest and recuperate and get spiritually charged and charge us. So one morning this lady came, and her name was Yoga Shakti Ma, and she was one of these typical long flowing robes. The hair was all out all over the place, flowing around. She looked like a witch. That's the hippie thing, and she brought with her 3 associates, 3 followers. So Yoga Shakti Ma, she had a little leaflet, and it was advertising a World Peace Conference. And she wanted Prabhupada to come and participate. Of course, Prabhupada was a known figure, so it's obvious that if she could get somebody on Prabhupada's caliber to come and speak, that would attract people to come. So they had as a respond address some flat, some apartment in Calcutta. So she, you know, gave her a whole, I mean, they were my values, so, you know, it's all one, everything's bliss, everything's nice, we're all one, we're all together, blah, blah, blah. And then Prabhupada, he kind of heard her for about 5 minutes, and then he said, look, he said, if you go into a stool house and you wave some incense around, does that make it a better place to stay? He said, you do your business and get out. So, when he said that, they went into shock. It was amazing. I mean, they literally went into shock. And she didn't know what to say. She thought, you know, somehow or another, they thought that Prabhupada was insulting her or their efforts by comparing it to a stool house. He was just going to tell her, you know, that this is the material world. There's no question of getting peace and happiness here. You have your businesses elsewhere. And just, you know, do what you have to do and get out. But he couldn't get that far, you know, to kind of unpack it. One of the followers was so shocked, he was shaking more than I am now. He couldn't say anything, and they just all got up and walked out, and they went back to Calcutta. Prabhupada sat back and he laughed. And he said, for all their yoga shakti, he said they have one apartment in Calcutta. He said, we have no such shakti, and we're spreading all over the world. So that's generally Prabhupada's, you know, impression and response to, you know, peace conferences and what they're like. But here you see in this beginning, you know, pamphlet that he's going to give out to people, his introduction is immediately the Srimad Bhagavatam is India's message of peace and goodwill. So, what is that peace and goodwill? Of course, the Srimad Bhagavatam tells us about our relationship with the Supreme Lord and tells us how to achieve it, how to enter into it, and how to make our human life a success. If you become a devotee of the Lord, you will automatically become peaceful. That Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, Gyatvam Mam Shantam Richyatim. Bhaktaram Jagannathapasam Sarvaloka Maheshwaram Sulidam Sarvabhutanam. If you know these features of the Supreme Lord, if you know Krishna to be the supreme controller of all the planets, if you know him as the actual enjoyer of everything, and if you know that he's your best friend, then you're Gyatvam Shantam Richyati. You become immediately peaceful in your heart. So this is actually the platform of real peace. And if you're peaceful, then you can have goodwill to others. Yeah, it's very difficult to have goodwill to others if you haven't, you know, you're not peaceful within yourself, and you're greedy or ambitious, you know, that you need this and you need that. Your mind's always agitated to get this and get that. There's no question of goodwill because everybody's in competition with each other, and everybody's trying to beat the other person down or the other country down in order to grab the resources so you can increase your enjoyment. So there's no question of peace and goodwill in, you know, in any form, genuine form, in a materialistic society. The question of peace and goodwill only comes genuinely if it's based on the Bhagavatam. And that's why Prabhupada didn't want to know about these other people, because they're not basing their ideas of peace and goodwill on anything but sentiment, but not real science, not real knowledge of who Krishna is, who they are, what the world is, you know, what action should be, what time is. These are the, you know, contents of the Bhagavad Gita. So anybody that wasn't firmly fixed on Bhagavad Gita or Srimad Bhagavatam, Prabhupada had no interest in. But it's not that he wasn't interested in peace and goodwill. He was, but real peace and goodwill. So this is his opening statement. The Bhagavatam will provide that. Then he says 60 volumes, the elaborate English version. He's just spent about 4 years writing the first canto. He started in 1960, maybe a little bit before, but in real earnest in 1960. At that point he was 64. When he finally came out with everything, he was 69. So that was just the first canto. And Prabhupada's advertising that he's going to deliver 60 volumes. That means the whole Bhagavatam. So if you look and see you know, if you do the calculation, it took him, let's say it took him 4 years to do the first canto. There's 11 more cantos, right? So on average it's 4 years for each canto. Then what is that? That's another 44 years. That means Prabhupada would have been about 115 by the time that he finished the work. I mean, what, you know, sane person would attempt such a thing at such a stage in life? If he was 30 years old, you know, maybe there's a reasonable chance of doing it. But at the fag end of his life, he's undertaking this translation, 18,000 verses, 60 volumes he's advertising. You know, it seems incredible. But as we read from that little article that he had published, it was a supernormal effort. You know, Prabhupada was operating on a different level. So, you know, he wasn't making the calculations that actually this is an unattainable goal. You know, I've left it too late, or no. He was going to do it, and the explanation for that actually is printed in the second volume of the first canto. And Prabhupada, in the preface, he makes this statement that he says, an unbeliever friend of mine became astonished to learn that we've taken up the mighty project for presenting 60 volumes of 400 pages each, simply for the matter of glorifying the Lord. But we should not forget to remember the Lord is unlimited. This material world is a fragmental portion of his unfathomable glories, out of which this tiny earth is a particle only. And on the surface of the earth there are numberless cities, and in each and every one of them there are hundreds of printing houses, all engaged in the matter of broadcasting the message of this limited space. So we can just imagine how many hundreds and thousands of volumes we may need to glorify the activities of the Supreme Lord, the unlimited Lord. Therefore, 60 volumes of the Bhagavatam are just a sample distribution of his glories, presented in a manner understandable by the stagnant brain of the residents of this insignificant globe. Otherwise, the residents of higher planets, who have got superior brains than man, do go through thousands and millions of volumes of the Srimad Bhagavatam to know about the glories of the Lord. That's Prabhupada's perspective, looking from the other end. Yeah, from a human perspective, trying to sit down and do 60 volumes, you know, possibly 40, 50 years to get it completed, it seems, you know, ridiculous. But from Prabhupada's point of view, it's very insignificant. On other places, there's millions of volumes. So there's unlimited work to be done. This is just a small fragmental portion of it, and he was determined to do it. So he wasn't thinking, you know, whether he would be able to complete it or not. His business was working for the pleasure of his spiritual master. So he'd been asked, preaching the English language, and therefore he was going to do it, and he left the results to Krishna. In December of '76, we were in Bombay, and Prabhupada told me one morning, he said, I never went to the West to become successful. He said, I went there out of duty. My spiritual master had told me to do it. He said, and Utsahan, if I had not had this enthusiasm, he said, I would have remained in Vrindavan. But my spiritual master asked me to do it, so I did it. And because of that faith in his spiritual master, of course, Prabhupada became successful. But anyway, this is his opening statement, 60 volumes. Then he says, carried by the Scindia Navigation Company Limited, Bombay, all over the world. Prabhupada, with great difficulty, got a free passage to New York, and a promise that when he wanted to, he could come back. But that was it. Srimati Maharaji actually didn't want to give him a ticket. Not because she didn't want to support his, you know, efforts, but she